we actually build algorithms that are more accurate than Aura and Apple that currently live on the Apple Watch. We will sacrifice the battery life of the wearable to some degree in order to get the more accurate measure. These wearables will eventually be implanted into our brains.
Dr. Daniel Gartenberg is the CEO and founder of SleepSpace and Senior Sleep Health Advisor to CPAP.com.
He has a PhD in psychology from George Mason University.
He has a ton of experience in data and spent 15 plus years publishing research.
You're going to be walking around this whole world of like sensing people's health and behaviors in a much more intimate way. It might be a scary picture, but I think that's what the future holds for us.
What are some of the top things for better sleep that you normally recommend?
Sure. So you probably heard some of these before, but I'll just recapitulate them. So, one of the main things is consistency. So keeping a consistent circadian rhythm helps you sleep deeper. And that has to do with similar times of when you go to bed, when you wake up, but even things like when you eat, when you exercise. These can all strengthen or shift your circadian rhythm. Another big thing, and is a major part of this, is getting sunlight before noon. And there's some hacks to emulate the sunlight if you're in an environment where that's difficult. And that sets this whole circadian rhythm up. Other things you've probably heard about are not eating too much close to bedtime, not having caffeine close to bedtime. Talk about the half-life of caffeine is sort of different for different people. Keeping your sleep environment quiet, dark, and cool. And I like to use technology to augment sound, light, and temperature and optimize those things. That's sort of my passion. But just a general way of doing it is figuring out a way to keep your environment as dark, quiet, and cool as possible. And you might even have like a 1% to 2% improvement in your sleep, but that can have payoff in dividends later on. The other big thing that we're going to dive into deep, if you have a problem with falling asleep and staying asleep, is changing your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors around sleep. And there's also a ton of other gizmos to help you relax, like vagus nerve stimulation. There's new headsets that do electrical stimulation. Keeping your lights red at night is another hack. And the biggest thing that I've identified for myself and many of my clients is actually optimize your breathing health at night is probably the number one reason why folks aren't getting deep sleep. So that's just off the top, the big things.
Fantastic. And that's a lot. So one that I noted that you said is because we have a lot of Scandinavians, we have the winter problem. And we learned that we need to go see the bright light. I've been told that you can find some kind of lamp with a lux of 10,000, and that can be the way to the light from the sun. Is that the same you would recommend, or do you have any other good hacks that we can do?
No, that's exactly right. 10,000 lux happy lamp. There's a bunch of them everywhere. It's actually used medically sometimes for seasonal affective disorder, but it can be used for this use case as well. There's some new gadgets that I've seen too, where it's like glasses that you wear that flashes light. And there's some evidence that the flashing of the light stimulates this physiological response. And this physiological response has been very well studied. It has to do with photoreceptors in your eyes that can actually distinguish different types of light, different brightnesses of light. And these photoreceptors in your eyes send a signal to your suprachiasmatic nucleus, which impacts the delivery of melatonin. And that's the main driver of the circadian rhythm.
And if someone has new melatonin, we also call it darkness hormone, and it's important that that gets produced when we need to fall asleep and stay asleep.
Thanks.
There's something you pioneered, because I think I've been following you for actually more than 10 years now. It's crazy how fast it goes. I think I saw your... I think I saw your TED Talk was the first time was that 2013 or 15?
It was 2017, but I can't believe it's almost 10 years now. Wow.
It goes fast.
Yeah.
And one of the things you pioneered was sound when we're sleeping. And here we're not talking about how you snore really well. Tell us a little bit more about that then.
Yeah, I got really deep into sound. So that was my first batch of grants with the National Science Foundation, National Institute of Health, was this idea that you can pulsate sounds because your brain is it's electricity at the end of the day. So there is evidence in the literature that you can stimulate delta waves if you pulse a sound at the uptick of the brain wave. And conventionally, it's been done with an EEG, which was necessary to measure the uptick. Our research question was, can we do it more non-invasively without having to have someone wear an EEG? Because I just think most people don't want to wear something on their head while they sleep at night. And so we actually showed that there was some evidence that we could do this by basically detecting which stage of sleep someone's in during sleep and playing a sound. And we published a paper in the journal Nature and Science of Sleep, showing that this was possible. And in this process, we ran some crazy studies and collected really rich data sets on using polysomnography, which is the gold standard of measuring sleep. And believe it or not, we actually built algorithms that are more accurate than Aura and Apple that currently live on the Apple Watch. So we're using Apple's hardware and our algorithms with Apple's hardware. And for you tech nerds out there, we use something called a temporal convolutional neural network, and it makes it super accurate. And we also use the phone sensors as well.
And then the critical people would be out there. How is it possible that a small startup can make a more accurate censoring or like an accurate algorithm than one of the biggest companies in the world? And what kind of validations do you have on that? I know we discussed some of it before, but
yeah. So some of the big companies in the world, one of the problems is they're trying to serve too many people. And so they'll make certain sacrifices on the hardware and algorithms in order to satisfy that. So since we're super focused on the biohacker, the person that really wants to know their sleep, for example, we will sacrifice the battery life of the wearable to some degree in order to get the more accurate measure. So we'll actually turn your phone or the Apple Watch into a more high resolution sensor where we're literally collecting more granular data than Apple is using in their algorithm. And then when we have this 24/7 polysomnography data on top of that, it really makes it more accurate. You can see it in the output I've posted a couple times comparing. I'll stack up Apple's algorithm with Aura's algorithm with our algorithm, and you can see how it produces more granular data on sleep quality.
got it. So the way to sum it up, you drain the battery more than Apple is willing to, and thereby you get more accurate data. And then you go more granular is the reason why you can have a better algorithm. And from a logical perspective, it makes sense that if you go more detailed, you can predict something more accurately.
That's summing it up pretty well. Also, the reference data, the 24/7 polysomnography, is a non-trivial thing to collect. Like we spent millions of dollars collecting that data to do it.
And that's the stuff that you use to validate the algorithm with.
Correct. Yeah.
Got it. You mentioned delta sleep. So that's deep sleep that you are trying to optimize for, right?
Correct.
Super. So for them, the people that are new, again, I can't pronounce it. The poly something is the gold standard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably
that's where you cut
Danish.
Yeah, but that's where you actually come in. And can you explain like what happens in the sleep lab? What are all the different measurements that we actually have in the gold standard that we are then trying to do with small devices? Just so someone that never heard about that before.
Yeah, so it's a montage of electrodes across the major brain regions. So that's getting at your brain waves on the temporal lobe, the parietal lobe, the frontal lobe. And so the brain actually all these lobes fire together. And when you look at those brain waves on an EEG, just so everyone sort of understands how this is measured, I think it's important. The gold standard measure is looking at these various signals. There's the brain regions, so that's EEG. Then there's EOG, which is under the eyes to use to measure rapid eye movement. The O is for ocular. Then there's EKG and EMGs. You're paralyzed during REM sleep, so EMG is also another signal. So you basically have these multiple signals that are displayed on a computer monitor, and a registered polysomnography technologist will look at this data and score it every 30 seconds based on some heuristics for what determines slow wave sleep versus non-REM versus lighter sleep versus REM sleep. It gets really nuanced and complicated because, for example, Europe has actually 5 sleep stages and the United States has 4. It's just sort of how you're cutting up these physiological measures that are not really totally discrete. They're sort of continuous, but we decide to cut them up. And so a human is actually the gold standard way of evaluating this, a human trained in looking at these physiological measures and determining what stage of sleep everyone's in every 30 seconds.
Thanks. But now we're going deeper into some different subjects, but I think this is quite interesting. I interviewed another guy that was working at Aura at the point, and one of his challenges was actually with how we do sleep stages, that he said it's not like an exact science that this is deep sleep. We just know that deeper stages of sleep, and then we kind of put like, these are the measurements that now we categorize it as deep sleep. Is that an accurate understanding, or what's your take on that now, being in the research for so many years? And often the nuances don't get into social media, but now we have a few minutes to discuss it.
Yeah. Was it Dazed and Body or someone else?
It was Chuck Hassard.
Oh, I know Chuck. Yeah. He's accurate. There's like, humans like to put things into categories, but it's pretty discrete. That being said, non-REM and REM is probably the clearest category. And then, cause like there's a clear physiologically different process when you're in REM sleep because you're paralyzed, you're relatively more paralyzed. You have apnea. Your eyes dart around because you're in rapid eye movement. Your brain waves are more like they're like when you're awake. So that's like a really clear distinction. Also, like the N1, like the very light stage, and N2, there's certain things that characterize it, such as sleep spindles, and there's other like physiological things that characterize it. But then when you get into non-REM, basically in Europe, there's N1, N2, N3, N4, and N3 and 4 is distinguished as slow wave sleep, deep sleep. In the United States, there's N1, N2, and 3, and only N3 is deep sleep. But there's almost, the right way to think about it is actually there's deeper deep sleep possibly where you're producing more delta power. My point is like the deep sleep aspect of it is more of a gradient than the other components. That makes sense.
It does. And it was the same thing that Chuck said as well.
Yeah.
That REM and non-REM, very clear, but the deeper stages. But this actually leads us over to another point, is the whole disease that have happened about people getting so anxious about their sleep tracking and sleep score. I think it has a name, autosomia. Autosomia. If I'm yeah. Tell us a little bit more about that. What happens when the biohackers go too far?
Yes. So I would say a lot of when it comes to sleep is knowing who you are, having metacognition. So if you're someone that's particularly anxious about their sleep data or just anxious in general, then the data can do more harm than good because you start ruminating and fixating on, oh, I got really bad deep sleep tonight, so now I'm going to have a horrible day. And like that thought in and of itself is a self-defeating thought, which I think that's one of the main things you help your entrepreneurs with and other folks is to, have more positive thinking and stuff like this. So you don't want to think like that. And if you are someone where if you have like 30 minutes of deep sleep, you're going to feel really bad on yourself for that. Then you can have orthosomnia, and then you get more stressed about your sleep and you actually sleep worse. So for that, we actually have a setting in our app where we preference, if you are someone who has issues falling asleep and staying asleep, instead of giving a sleep score, we have you focus on your sleep efficiency, which makes more sense in that scenario because you should be trying to spend more time in bed asleep. So,
and if you just explain what sleep efficiency is.
Yeah. So sleep efficiency is the amount of time spent asleep divided by the amount of time in bed trying to sleep. So a healthy sleep efficiency is usually in like the 85 to 95% range. You know, if you're trying to sleep 8 hours, you're usually in bed about 8.5. If you're 100% of the time in bed asleep, you might be sleep depriving yourself. That's why it's not
Yes.
100%. So what you want is really just 85 to 95%. And so if you're less than 85 on a regular basis, you might have insomnia and you should see a medical professional or use something called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. We have cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia based programming in our platform. It's not medical, but it's based on this proven method.
And let's just talk a second about that, because I think it's extremely important. And I meet a lot of people that get so concerned. Personally, I get very low deep sleep on the Oura Ring and has always gotten that, which is the reason why I'm actually going to go to a sleep lab to see, is it actually accurate? So I need to do something more, or am I already doing, like, do I already have good enough sleep? But I know many people that get so concerned. Like, I read my data in the evenings, not in the morning, because I don't want it to impact my day. So then I can evaluate afterwards what happened the day before, is there anything I want to tweak. But how do you work with people that now got like so anxious that it's really like making them nervous? They're no longer getting good sleep. They feel really tired when they wake up. How does like the overview of like that program work?
Well, I mean, if you feel tired when you wake up, that's almost the most important signal. I would say that is more important than whatever your Oura Ring says, for example.
And a point to that, if you wake up in one of the deeper stages of sleep, wouldn't you feel a little bit groggy the first 5-10 minutes, and then after 15 minutes you should feel rested? Or what's your take on that?
I mean, there's something called sleep inertia, which is what you're talking about. Typically, if you're getting enough sleep, you're usually waking up in a lighter stage of sleep anyway. And we have like a smart alarm clock that mitigates that to some degree in the SleepSpace software.
Yeah, that's one of the things I like. So you get woken up when you're in a lighter state. So it doesn't, you don't have the same sleep inertia. But someone that gets woken up, that don't have your app, that wakes up in a deep stage, they might have, how long would you say the sleep inertia before they should be feeling well?
Yeah, so if you're like really sleep deprived, it can last as long as 2 hours. Basically, your the blood flow in your brain takes a while to ramp up, especially when you're sleep deprived, and that's why you get that morning grogginess. So first off is get enough sleep. And then after that, try to optimize waking up in a lighter sleep stage to some degree. Usually you're not getting deep sleep if you've gotten enough sleep during that time, but you could be getting REM sleep, and it's better to get light sleep than REM sleep, is how I think about it.
Okay, can you repeat that? It's better to get light sleep than REM sleep?
It's better to wake up. Sorry, I misspoke. It's better to wake up in light sleep than it is to wake up in REM sleep or deep sleep.
Got it. And we kind of forgot to mention it because I assume that most people know. REM sleep is where we have most of our dreams. It is also possible to dream in some of the other sleep stages, but that is what we associate with dreaming. And the deeper sleep is when you are harder to wake up. Where the light sleep, it doesn't take as much to wake you up. Exactly. Would that be a kind of way to say it? Like, a lot of neurons is of course lost, but...
Yeah, and both REM and deep are good. You basically want more REM and you want more deep. But to answer your question, I try to tell people to compare. I think there's signal comparing the Oura data or some other wearable data within yourself, but I won't necessarily believe the raw value, if does that make sense to you?
Yeah, so you won't like compare it, does it seem accurate, but don't just trust the data from the device.
Basically, like if it says 30 minutes, I think it might actually be 60 minutes. So I'm not trusting the raw value that it's producing. But if from night to night, if one night it says 30 minutes and then the next night it said an hour for deep sleep, for example, I would believe that on the night that it said an hour that I had better sleep quality.
That makes sense. And I think I listened to a lot of the podcasts with Andrew Huberman and Matthew Walker. I think I got to more than 80 episodes with Matthew Walker and writing notes. And one of the things that I heard, because people often obsess about deep sleep, but according to studies, as far as I heard, it's only REM that's actually related to all-cause mortality, where we have the studies that it makes a difference. But of course, deep sleep is also important for, as you mentioned at the start, some of the different diseases and so on.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with that. So I think the biggest thing that's related to all-cause mortality and all the diseases is actually sleep amount. So that's where like a lot of the research is that, not getting enough sleep, short sleeping is related to Alzheimer's, dementia. Deep sleep is definitely related to Alzheimer's disease and related dementia. That's what I study. Matthew Walker actually has publications of that as well. Now, I'm not exactly sure where you're citing there, but deep sleep is basically very highly related to sleep amount. So when you sleep deprive yourself the next day, you get more deep sleep because that's what your body needs. Like deep sleep is related to the sleep homeostat, your sleep need. So I think it's clear. I don't think maybe it's a nuance in how the literature is being characterized, but if you're a short sleeper, you're not getting enough deep sleep and then you're more likely to die. I think that's non-controversial.
Got it. Let's keep it at that. If we go back in that program you have where you actually work with people having issues with falling asleep, staying asleep, and so on. Tell a bit more about CBT, how we can use that cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yeah. So, I'm all about the sound and the light and the automatic things. But then I started realizing that the most proven intervention for the most common sleep struggle, falling asleep and staying asleep, is something called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And what ties cognitive behavioral therapy together is the therapist or specialist tries to address thoughts, feelings, and behaviors around the problem that they're solving for. So like there's CBT for anxiety, depression, PTSD. Now there's also one for insomnia. And we ran a randomized controlled trial showing that we can augment typical treatments for this. It's usually a 6-week program where you go over 5 main modules that are what CBTI is based on. And we actually showed there's more remission to insomnia when the therapist uses our technology compared to when they don't. And we're publishing that.
A layman's word for remissions.
You're more likely to not have insomnia again when they use the technology.
Super. What are other interesting things that you looked at? We talked about before we got on the show, something about new technologies, devices, and so on. It's always a pleasure to follow you. Would you like you have your fingers on the newer things that are happening research-wise and also commercially?
Yeah, so I went really deep. I kind of, I'm a biohacker optimizer, but then life sort of threw me a couple curveballs with a chronically sick baby and some struggles with my startup. I was just under a lot of stress and I ended up gaining about 10 pounds. And then I was working for an at-home sleep test company. There's a bunch of them that are FDA cleared in the States. So you don't necessarily have to go to a sleep lab. And I would say about 50% of the US population has what I call a suboptimal breathing health, and about 20% has, or 20 to 30% has either sleep apnea or upper airway resistance, which are both medical conditions. And I identified with one of these at-home sleep tests. I've used Whisper, used Watchpad, I've used Happy Ring. I've used a bunch of them. There's lots of ways to do it nowadays. But I actually have a mild case of sleep apnea. And that was one of the main things that was causing me to not, I was noticing I wasn't getting as much deep sleep as I usually do. And then treating that ended up being a major improvement to my deep sleep and sleep quality, basically everything. So that was a recent challenge that I had. I thought I solved my sleep, and then over the life cycle, things can creep in. And so it's really something where it's a lifelong journey of optimizing your sleep is what I discovered on that.
For sure. So do you sleep with a mask now, or did you manage to get around it with lifestyle?
So there's 4 main FDA cleared treatments for sleep apnea. People don't know a lot of this, at least in the United States. I think it's available in Europe too. But so there's CPAP, and I'm actually about to start CPAP because I want to fully optimize. There's what I currently use is, and I there's a CPAP.com. You can actually get a CPAP for pretty affordable price there. You need a diagnosis though to get a CPAP. So you'd use one of these at-home sleep tests, produce a diagnosis, and then
And a quick explanation of what a CPAP is.
so it's basically a air pressure that opens up your airway. Because for obstructive sleep apnea, there's actually different types of apnea, which is like one of the reasons why you should see a doctor and have them get your feedback. There's essential and obstructive, and also complex when you have like both. But about most people have obstructive, and it's a physical blockage of the airway, especially as you get older. If you're more overweight, your airway can get a little bit blocked when you sleep. Sometimes the position can affect this as well. And so this basically detects when that's happening and shoots air through to open up your collapsed airway.
Fantastic. What are the others?
And so that's like the gold standard first line of defense. If you're a mild to moderate case, which is what I had, I use a mandibular advancement device. And so that's a specially designed mouth guard. Your dentist actually has to make it, and it pushes out your jaw. So it's basically like wearing a mouth guard every night. And I detected on that I went from 15 on my apnea hypopnea index, AHI. I think they use ODI in Europe, but in the States it's AHI. And basically that's a drop in your pulse oxygenation of 3% or more over a certain period of time. So I went from 15 AHI per hour to 5 per hour. And if you're a really severe case, basically it's just to give you a reference for this. Mild is 5 to 15. Moderate is 15 to 30. Severe is more than 30. The most you'll ever see, like, and it's really bad, it's like a doctor will report that like the worst case they'll ever have is usually around 100. And so that's 100 of instances of not breathing per hour, for example. So I was at 15, and you just imagine that is really bad for sleep. It makes you super tense. It makes you hyper aroused, basically. That's why it's related to insomnia as well. They're both sort of hyper arousing disorders. And so I was at 15, and then I went to 5 when I did my treatment. Now I want to be like a super healthy person. Like say you're a biohacker and you just want to be the best. You should be at 0 to 1. Now in the medical world, we don't deem it severe enough to warrant any treatment if it's more than 5. There's also something called upper airway resistance, where in the States they actually won't treat you at all because they don't deem it severe enough. It's quite common in women, and you can be completely like, usually you're thin actually. You have a very small airway or jaw, which can cause it. I could talk about this for a while,
Quick question for that, Dan. Because the Oura Ring have your oxygen levels.
Right.
Would that not detect, because when you're not breathing that much, you should have lower oxygen in your blood. So instead of being in the 97 to 99, or that's not.
So this is like getting at the issue of these consumer wearables not measuring at a granular level enough, almost similar to what I was saying before. And they'll do it eventually, but like Apple Watch, for example, if you have an Ultra or something, after 30 days, it'll say that you might have sleep apnea. But you need to measure the pulse oxygenation multiple times a second, like 50 times a second, for example. I think Aura gets it like every 5 minutes or something. And so
So in between those 5 minutes, you could easily have had a few challenges, and then you're back to the normal level again, because we normalize quite fast.
Exactly.
Okay.
So there's like almost no signal at the level of granularity that almost all the consumer wearables report pulse oxygen. Maybe there's a little bit, but it's really not. Like I almost get nothing from it. If you were like a really severe case, maybe you'd see some signal. But if you were,
you didn't see anything with your tracking. There was nothing in the oxygen levels from the Oura Ring that would tell you that you had sleep apnea.
I didn't see. Like I was in the 90s like the mid 90s during this time. And
Yeah.
they still had a problem.
Got it. That's good to know, because that's one of the things I've been looking at as well for myself to optimize. And I thought like, well, the oxygen levels are super high. I also have one to measure like all the time, like for the finger for breath work, but I don't sleep with that. So I'm considering what I did one night, that I had an app listening to how I was sleeping to see if I was snoring or how it sounded and so on.
Yeah. So
But what are
actually,
the best?
yeah, snoring is probably a better measure. So I'll measure snoring throughout the night too on my app.
Yeah. So that would actually give an indication saying like, hey, you're snoring so much, you might want to consider whether you have sleep apnea.
Yeah, and there's a certain type of snore too, where it's like not rhythmic. I actually have an example that you can check out if you use SleepSpace and then search for like snoring. You'll actually be able to listen to like a normal snore versus like a sleep apnea snore. And so that's, but you might have sleep apnea also and not snore. Probably the best, I don't know if it's available in Europe, but a device that's 510 cleared in the States to measure SpO2, and you can use it to diagnose apnea, is Circle Plus. Has a new ring, SIRCUL. It's a similar form factor as Aura, but it will produce FDA cleared granular SpO2 data. So it's just like an Aura ring, but it'll do what you're asking it to do in terms of evaluating your breathing.
Got it. Why do you think Orin doesn't measure it all the time? Again, because of battery, or they just haven't had a focus on it, or
They're going to do, I'm sure they're going to do it. But yeah, it's that same issue I brought up with they're trying to appeal to a broader audience and there's a battery challenge.
that makes sense. And one of the things that many of them are competing on is saying we have a long battery life. So that's kind of a challenge.
I don't know why they don't just have a setting, I don't know. I'm sure they're working. I know they're working. So they're going to have it.
Makes sense. What are some of the other cool technologies also measuring EEG? Potentially EEG is the measuring of the brainwaves. Anything you see out there? Back in the days there was Dream, but like lately when I've been going in looking at Dream, the French company that was supposed to do measurements, I don't see that much from them. There's Muse that also do it. Like where are we on the state of that?
Yeah, Dream got bought out at a low price. They actually got bought out by an at-home sleep apnea company called Sunrise. But yeah, they raised a bunch of capital and then it didn't really work. But there's a bunch of them out there. The first one was actually Zeo, which also didn't work because people didn't want to like wear an EEG while they're sleeping. So just to backtrack, the other two treatments for apnea are Inspire, which is periglossal nerve stimulation. It's actually an implant, like a cyborg. And that's for more severe cases. And then actually there's GLP-1s now. There's Zepbound in the United States that's FDA cleared. And EMT, this is actually a fifth one, can also sometimes do some surgical things and stuff. And there's also many ways to optimize, such as making sure your nose is clear and stuff like this, losing weight. But just to tie that out, there's other behavioral things as well. Positional therapy, basically sleeping on your left side or your side, but in general, sleeping on your left side is generally better. If you are someone especially if you're someone with a breathing issue, sleeping on your back is not good.
And just to tie it off, if someone doesn't wake up with good energy after 10, 15 minutes, or at least in half an hour, and have actually gotten 8 hours of sleep, this would be something to try and look for, because a lot more people have these issues than one would expect.
Yeah, like I'm not like, you don't look at me and you're like, oh, he's super fat. I hope not. Like, so I think, especially when you're older too, it happens, just the muscles get weaker. So I think it's a huge issue. And so many people ask me, how do I get more deep sleep? I would say like at least 50% of the time, it has something to do with this. Anyway, so can we want to circle back to the EEG question now?
Yeah, let's do that.
Was there anything else because there's a lot on the breathing thing.
Are there any other natural things that work and that we have studies on? Like I've done several breathwork certifications and so on. And so many people are having horrible breathing, which is 24/7 that you breathe, right? And there's many different techniques to practice your breathing, but I haven't been looking deeper into sleep apnea for how to practice your breathing.
Yeah. So I mean, you've probably seen the mouth taping. If you don't have a nose obstruction, I think mouth taping could marginally help. It's not a treatment per se, but it's like a natural thing that might help is being able to breathe through your nose at night is healthier in general. You know, Nestor talks about that a lot, but especially during the night. But if you have like allergies or something, like actually addressing dust mites was one way that I helped my issue as well, which are very common in New York. I have these special bedding that blocks them out, basically. Other things, myofunctional therapy. So basically, like there's ways of building up these muscles with a myofunctional therapist. There's other. Those are the big ones. Then, from a natural perspective, I'd say there's some small. I wouldn't say it's a treatment, but you have like less GABA and nitric oxide when you're having sleep apnea. So supplementations of those things might have some kind of small effect.
Got it. All right, let's jump to the EEG.
Okay. Yes. So the EEG thing. So like for your question, I think your next step, possibly before, I mean, the sleep lab will give you the gold standard, but the negative of the sleep lab is you're not sleeping necessarily as you normally would when you're in the sleep lab. So for example, there's something in sleep science called the first night effect, where the first night in any environment usually have a worse night of sleep. And that's just like an evolutionary thing where, you know, we want to be in a comfortable environment. So when we're in a new one, you're sort of more hyper aroused, you typically worse sleep. So it'll give you a more gold standard measure, but the ideal would be something like Dream. There's one in New York called Elamind, which has a really good sensor similar to Dream. There's Muse, as you mentioned, which is a good one. And so these are all consumer devices which will give you a pretty good read on something like your deep sleep. And so I think you should go in that direction. I think a lab would be good. Usually the path that I go is at-home sleep tests. That's FDA cleared. There's a number of them that I mentioned before. Rule out the breathing issue. And then a consumer EEG like Muse or Elamind.
And is Muse accurate enough?
Yeah, I mean, they got pretty good. I've actually only studied the Dream compared to polysomnography. Like I have run that study. It's a similar sensor. I haven't actually run the Muse study, so I can't definitively say, but they've been around for a while.
But do you know if they got FDA cleared for didn't sleep?
I think they're working on it. I know it's super accurate. I know it's going to be very accurate. It's not FDA cleared for polysomnography. So yeah.
Got it. Because the Dream you can also use for meditation and other things to practice. I had the first version, I think, of the Muse back in the days, which is very different now with the bandage you can get instead. That seems to be a lot more comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks pretty. I haven't tried the new one. I had the old one as well. It looks super comfortable. Yeah, and it has other use cases, right? But I mean, your whole brain oscillates in these brainwaves. So like theoretically, you can just have a couple sensors and it'll tell you which stages, if you're getting more or less deep sleep. The only issue is artifact. Motion can really mess with these things, but you know, you're not moving much for when you're asleep, which helps.
Heard the critique at least of Muse, but this is back in the days, and other of these sensors is the dry sensors are often not that accurate, and they are more sensing muscle tension than actually the brain waves. Do you think that's still the case, or
there's more artifacts with the dry? I mean, that's why it's like a step. I think pragmatic way to answer your question is measuring it with consumer grade, getting a sense, and also doing an at-home sleep test, so basically doing everything from the comfort of your home for like a few $100, and then doing the hassle based on that of like going to a sleep lab. Obviously, if you have I'm speaking to you right now, but like in certain situations, you should talk to your doctor and just go to a sleep lab too.
Of course. So I think for me as well, I love to do tests. So otherwise I would be doing that, but I would love to actually try the experience of a sleep lab and see how it is, and then also measure it up against different variables. I think it's also really interesting content to share, and having that data on myself to see like how accurate is it on
Oh yeah.
at least those nights, and do at least 2 nights, potentially 3, also because the first night, as you're saying, you need to get used to it. So I think for the average, not super nerd, loving to get all kind of data, I would not recommend them to go directly to a sleep lab either. There's so many things you can do before, as you're saying as well.
Oh yeah, and I'm totally with you. Like I was so excited to go to a sleep lab because I just wanted to compare, what my devices were saying with what the gold standard metric was.
Yeah, that makes sense. What are some of the misconceptions about sleep that you see, Dan, that you would love to help clear out?
Yeah, so a couple misconceptions about sleep. One of the big ones that I've seen is sometimes the media interprets the science around night owls as interpreting it that it's unhealthy to be a night owl. And I see it as a correlational versus a causational thing. I don't think there's necessarily anything inherently unhealthy about being a night owl. But if you look at the night owl population, they do have more negative health outcomes. This is likely due to social jet lag, meaning our society is just nicer to morning people because we're expected to wake up for school or work. But if you didn't have those social pressures, there's nothing inherently unhealthy about being a night owl as long as you're consistent. The most important thing is consistency.
Got it. That actually segues into something else that I would love you to take on, because I'm also a night owl. And it's said that you get the majority of your deep sleep early in the night, and then you get more REM sleep later in the night. So if you go to bed a lot later, you lose more on the deep sleep. If you get up earlier, you lose more on the REM sleep. But it's also said that you get ideally between, I think, 10 to 2 or 4. I've heard that that's the best time for deep sleep. But where my thought has been like, but if you're a night owl, shouldn't that timing be later? If like your promo type of sleeping is more going to bed around 12 and then sleeping until 8, 9 in the morning?
No, yeah, and that's another. I feel like some of the influencers in the space kind of push this around. If you consistently go to bed at the same time every night, your body will adjust such that it's a typical cycle. Now, say I go to bed at midnight every night, you're not getting. I don't think you're getting more or less deep sleep or REM on a general basis versus if you were to taking out the variable of if you're a morning lark or a night owl. Just take that out for a second. If you were to always go to bed at 12 and always go to bed at 10, I don't think on a regular basis, I don't think you'd be getting more or less deep sleep or REM. Now, if I always go to bed at midnight and then the next night I go to bed at 10, I think that could impact it. I think that's where the studies show that you would get, if you go to bed early, you'd get more deep sleep then, I think. So like on a small scale level, it's true. But on a larger scale level, I would say like over a longer period of time, I would think that it's not true.
So your argument would be, if you do one night where you, instead of going to bed at 12, that would be your normal rhythm, you might get a little bit more sleep if you go to bed at 10. But if you then go to bed at 10 the next 6 months every day, it would even out. So then you would adjust to getting your normal levels of deep sleep.
Exactly. Yeah. We have like these homeostats, things even out. Like everyone can, I think, relate to like you stay out late one night and then you remember a bunch of dreams in the morning because you slept in. That's the thing. But if you always just went out late every single night or something, I don't think you would perceive that.
No. Oh. What have I not asked you about sleep that we should have discussed?
Oh, good questions. I mean, there's a whole supplementation thing that we could get into that I've been studying a lot, like the whole melatonin question. what supplements work, what's a good place for them or not. So I've been studying this a lot, and the most common thing that people do for their sleep is actually take melatonin. Obviously, there's also, and you should speak to your doctor, but there's also, pharmacological interventions as well. Actually, in the States, I think SSRIs are the most common thing that doctors prescribe for an issue like insomnia.
And is
Like
antidepressants.
antidepressant. Yeah, which is kind of funny. But, for long-term benefits, the gold standard is changing your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, because that's going to impact it forever versus, always having to sort of do a more Band-Aid. And there is a time and place for these things as well. I'm not going to say that there's not.
What's your take on melatonin? Because I heard different things. I think I heard one episode with Andrew Huberman, and I might be mistaken, but I remember us being in Barcelona listening to his sleep series, one of his early ones, where he was not the biggest fan of melatonin. He said like the difference that it made was so small that didn't really matter that much. And then I'm starting to hear in the biohacking circles that melatonin might be one of the best things for longevity. I think it's Simlan and other people as well has been talking about it. I might be referencing wrong, and he might not say it's good, but what's your take on melatonin?
Yeah, and it's again a complicated thing. So generally, first off, for jet lag or shifting your circadian rhythm, there's definitely a clear use case there where it's beneficial. The question of taking it every night, for example, I think for certain populations, it might make sense. So, for example, people might not realize this, but actually, if you have hypertension, you're more likely to have less endogenous production of melatonin. So there might be more of a reason to take it on a regular basis. But in general, I think it's a little bit unclear in the literature, but there might be some evidence that taking it on a regular basis could impact your endogenous receptors to it. And it is a hormone. And oftentimes also people take too much and the dosages are too much. Most of the science is like on 1 milligram, like 300 micrograms to 1 milligram. But oftentimes over the counter in the States, it's like 5 to 10 milligrams, and then you can get groggy the next day. So overall, I'm not a huge fan. I'm more for a fan of like CBD or GABA for long-term usage.
Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, so CBD and GABA is the most common inhibitory neurotransmitter, and it's it's safe, probably a better safety profile than melatonin. And so there's randomized controlled trials showing that that's effective in improving sleep quality. And then also CBD, especially for or CBN for that racing mind, it's non-psychedelic. Like marijuana, for example, if it is psychedelic, will inhibit your REM sleep. This won't do that. Helps with inflammation, helps sort of with the racing mind. And actually combining those, there's one MD Sleep combines CBD with GABA. And
is this over-the-counter supplements you can buy?
Yeah, this is all over the counter in the States. I'm not exactly sure. I think in Europe, melatonin is not over the counter for most countries. But in the States, all these things are over the counter.
Got it. What about the classic as magnesium and glycine for better sleep?
You have to make sure I'm pro magnesium too. Certain people are definitely deprived of it. And so that's another thing you can do is like see if you need these things before you take them. But for the ones that have really good safety profile, you can just take them too. Like magnesium has a very good safety profile. You have to make sure it's the right type of magnesium. There's different types. What was the other one you said?
Lysine?
Yeah, I mean, I think that can be good too. I don't know much about it.
No, I started looking more into it lately, so I'm going to test it out. It's on the experimental list.
Oh, cool.
It's always fun to try one thing at a time. Another thing that when I looked into more literature on things that could help was caramel tea.
Was what?
Caramel tea.
Oh yeah. No, yeah, I think that can be good. And another thing that, and like the tea ritual, my wife does chamomile, and I think it's like a relaxing ritual, basically. Another whole thing, we talked about sound and, having red lights at night, and my tech can do that as well. But also temperature is a big thing that kind of glossed over. And there's a lot of, like, for example, if I'm particularly wound up before bed, taking a warm bath or shower for a while is a really good hack for having the metacognition when you're particularly stressed that night.
What's your take on blue blockers? Do you believe they work or not?
No,
Have
I
you
mean,
seen
I
any
think it makes
studies that
sense. I'm a big fan of no sunglasses, like just getting sunlight. That's one of my big hacks too. And I like the true dark strategy of the glasses. I use it in my whole home, but there's a place I have like red hued lights in my home. I could actually set it behind me right now if you want to see it. But so we have a ritual where I basically have it programmed in my technology. Hey, S, I'm going to bed. SIRI. I still don't want to activate anyone's things. And then all my lights will turn red and ocean waves will play. And that's like our wind down ritual.
But what about, because if you go to bed with the SleepSpace, the app that you build, then you will look at your phone before. Would you put blue blockers to ensure that you don't get the light from the phone that have an impact? Or what would your approach be for that? Or you think that light that you get when you just put it for going to bed is so little that it doesn't impact?
Yeah. So usually when I do that, it's like an hour before bed. So that, I mean, yeah, you look at it like an hour before bed and say, I'm going to bed, everything turns red. And then I put it in my special charger thing and I don't look at it. Actually, we have it programmed as well, such that using the shortcut, it also turns off the Wi-Fi and turns off the Bluetooth when I do that. Because my whole thing can work without, because the phone is a problem. That's part of the tension in building technology around this. So I go through great efforts to minimize the negatives of the phone, basically, in the sleep improvement system.
So you basically look at it an hour before going to bed and said, I'll be sleeping in 1 hour. That's what you start on the phone, and then you put it over, and then the sound starts.
Exactly.
Got it. That makes sense. Because that's been one of my things in regard to the app is I would like to get the phone out of the bedroom, or that you don't use it too much. I also have a wake up lamp, but it's so like the pros and cons of like the granular data that you get and that you can actually improve your deep sleep while having these sounds that helps you sleep better. So
Yeah.
it's pros and cons, but it's pretty amazing that you can actually get that data, and if you can see that you're sleeping better and deeper with the sounds as well from the app, right?
And I have new tech coming out. I mean, my charger thing, you can put it at the bottom of your bed. So your phone is sort of like out of reach, basically, if you put
Nice.
it at the foot of your bed. And I'm working on a new product that's actually a whole device. So you won't need your work phone to do all this. But that's in the wings. I could use a little more VC capital to execute on it. But I have a grander solution to the it's a very astute problem that I'm very aware of. So I'm trying to figure out ways to solve.
Nice. I think it's worth mentioning, at least one of the things I find really interesting about your company as well, is a lot of it is based on research grants, where many people have mostly raised VC money and so on. You have also raised private capital, but you raised a ton of money from different grants so that you have done so much research, like that you then put into this app and this program, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah. And the only problem is that, NIH is actually one of the biggest funders of startups in the United States, maybe the biggest, but they're under a lot of attack right now. So
I can imagine.
Yeah. They're threatening to cut the budget by 40%, see what actually happens, but it might actually severely impact.
Fingers crossed. But
Yeah.
you are raising a smaller round if anyone is interested when they listen to it. It might be close by then, but there might still be a possibility for some of these new developments you want to do.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential for tech with AI and everything, and that's another place that we have to touch on. but basically augmenting all of these sensor data with large language models, is the future of this space. I have a Dr. Snooze chatbot that does it to some degree. It's kind of cool. But there's a lot there. And, the vision here is I go to a doctor eventually and this exists to some degree, but the companies have floundered a little bit. They're called digital therapeutics. You go to a doctor, instead of them giving you a drug, they might give you a piece of software or a drug with a piece of software. That might actually be the best thing. So that's sort of where the real passion that I have is creating that, getting that to actually work.
Makes sense. It's live in Germany where they have several apps that are being given as prescriptions, but we need it to be rolled out more places because instead of giving pharma, you now have these amazing apps that can actually be therapeutics.
Yeah, I mean, it exists in the States as well. Sleepio is one, Somnus is another one. They're FDA cleared to treat insomnia. The issue is a lot of these companies spent literally hundreds of millions of dollars building out an FDA cleared digital therapeutic. They got the approval and then insurance didn't reimburse for the treatment. So it sort of made their whole business model worthless
Collapse.
to a large degree. Yeah.
Yeah, that's tough. Dan, when we're going to meet up again in 5 years, hopefully also before, what do you think are going to be the big things we're going to be talking about when it comes to sleep there? What's going to be the new cutting edge?
I mean, I think that these wearables will eventually be implanted into our brains. And we can, I would love to work with Neuralink, for example, and to implement some of these technologies literally into the brain. I think you're going to have coaches augmented by AI. There'll be extensions of me, which basically already exists to a large degree. Basically, everything that I would say to somebody is to a large degree instantiated in the app with the chatbot in there. But that's just going to take on a whole new level. And I think we're going to actually walk around and be able to identify, we never really quite got there, but Aura does it to some degree. It's oh, Johnny's having a bad day of work. He had no sleep last night. But when the LLMs and the sensors combine with the augmented reality, you're going to be walking around this whole world of sensing people's health and behaviors in a much more intimate way. It might be a scary picture, but I think that's what the future holds for us.
Thank you, Dan. Let's see where the future brings. It's growing fast these days. When you follow the AI development and so on, you're yeah. So I wouldn't be surprised if you're right in 5 years' time. But thank you so much for coming on the show again.
Thank you for having great chat.